Stabilizers are often one of the most cursed components to deal with in a keyboard, especially if you've ever tried to tune them yourself and the ticking just won't stop no matter what you do. Today, I'm hoping to demystify some of this process for you by giving you a pretty comprehensive guide on how to effectively tune your stabilizers. Now, this is comprehensive. It is not all-inclusive. I won't be using multiple kinds of lube here, but this should get you in a pretty good place to do the best job possible in making sure the stabilizers on your keyboard are as refined as possible. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on cherry-style plate mount and PCB-mounted stabilizers. Now, do note that while we will not be specifically covering co-star stabilizers, a lot of the techniques we'll be applying here can be applied to co-star with a little bit of imagination and just understanding where metal contacts plastic. And if you have any other tips or bits of advice that we didn't cover in today's video, make sure to respectfully comment that down below in the video's discussion. I'll be referencing this a lot in the future, and I'm really hoping we can get some good conversation going on to help people understand why they're having a hard time tuning their stabilizers. Now, this Icky 68 Aurora Round 2 Zen Pond Edition is going to be the focus for today's content. Unfortunately, this particular board has the sort of perfect storm of problems going on. We've got some warped keycaps, we've got some possible manufacturing errors with the stabilizers, we have a super flexy 1.2mm PCB, and we're dealing with unevenly or overly lubed switches. Your board will require disassembly to get to the stabilizers in the majority of situations involving PCB mount stabilizers. This is actually one advantage of plate mount stabilizers in that even if your board is a soldered PCB, you only really have to desolder the stabilized switches to get to the stabilizers most of the time. Once the stabilizers are removed, carefully disassemble all the components and make sure all parts are physically in good shape. And be sure to clean off the PCB underneath the stabilizers if they were pre-lubed, because lube can sometimes cause the stems to stick. At this point, if you're using unclipped stabilizers, you're also going to want to clip the extra legs on the bottom of the stabilizer stem. Just take a set of side cutters and clip off the 2 feet that have extra prongs that stick down towards the bottom of the PCB. This will eliminate the sort of bouncy, rattly noise that unclipped stabilizers tend to have. But if you prefer that bouncy effect and a more muted sounding modifier, leave the feet as they are. It's your keyboard. Since I imagine most of you don't have access to a sonic cleaner, a bowl of warm water and Dawn dish soap with some pipe cleaners and shop towels will be the best way to clean off your stabilizer parts. Pipe cleaners are also going to be great for getting into the stab inserts and the housing wire hooks. Once clean, lay out all of your parts on a towel or other cloth surface to dry. Q-tips can help a lot with that. Matter of fact, while you're at it, get a lot of Q-tips. Like, all of them. Once everything is confirmed dry, you can move on to prep and lubing. Make sure your stab locations are clean and ready to go. Again, if you have any remaining lube on the PCB under where the stabilizer stems go, there is a possibility that the stem can get momentarily stuck to the PCB and cause a momentary delay in that stabilized cap returning, depending on how weak your springs are. For PCB mount stabilizers, if you're using a 1.2mm PCB, like in the Icky 68 Round 2 we have here, be sure to have your pads down to ensure stab housings fit properly, since this can cause rattling and housings popping out of the PCB, even if initially it feels like they're installed just fine. For plate mount stabilizers, if you find the housings are a little loose, try using small strips of 3M medical tape as shims under the front and back of the housings on the plate. This will dramatically reduce rattle and movement. Just be sure it's evenly applied to make sure that you're getting proper stabilizer movement. Today we'll be using 205 grade 0 for everything. This is sort of a personal preference thing. I personally find I get the best results. It also simplifies the process since I can use it for the stems on the outside and the inside. You will find your mileage varies if you use something like XHT BDZ or dielectric grease on your wires. Now, typically, we would start with lubing the inside of the stabilizer housings very lightly with the 205 grade 0 and a brush. However, the Wuche stabilizers we have on hand today have a small, I think, silicone insert on the inside of the stab housing. So much like a silent switch, we want to make sure we're not over lubing these. So I'm going to stick to just lubing the stem today. If upon assembly you find that there's still a little bit too much scratch in the stabilizer stem, you can just use a set of jeweler's claws and grip the stem, pull pull it up and brush on a little bit more lube. Remember, less is more. This will be a repeating theme throughout the rest of this guide. So with that, we'll move on to the stems. Grab them with a set of tweezers and spread a very thin amount of lube on the stem exterior on all faces. We're talking the same pen size amount of lube that we use on lubing switches. You don't need a ton here. Less is more. You can always add more lube later, but it is more frustrating to remove it. When you're done, the stem should only look like it's glistening. If you can see clumping or else can't cleanly make out the surface texture and manufacturing marks anymore, you've gone too far. If you can barely see any lube pushing out from the sides of the brush as you're applying it, you're probably good to go. But if you find you have applied just a little too much lube, I recommend wiping your brush off on a nearby cloth surface and then using the brush to remove the lube, since eventually what's going to happen is the surface you're lubing and the brush are going to reach an equilibrium in how much lube one and the other can hold. From here, you insert the stem into the stabilizer housing. Make sure the face with 2 openings faces the front of the housing where the wire hooks into the stabilizer housing. And of course, repeat the process with every stem until they are paired with a housing. Next, we're going to want to check the condition of the wires. This section is going to be really important to follow along with, because this, almost more than anything else, can make or break your ability to effectively tune stabilizers. 2U wires are less likely to be warped. The spacebar wires are going to be the most prone to warping, just because they're the largest wire. Don't immediately just trust eyeballing it. Place the wire on a known flat surface and check from above and from the sides, flipped both ways, for any signs of deflection or bending on the stabilizer wire. Use 2 fingers to hold down the wire on the leg and near where the stabilizer housing would grip to verify the deflection you're seeing and where the deflection is occurring. Using a sturdy table edge or other sturdy flat surface, position the wire on the edge of your table right where the origin point of the deflection is and start applying gentle, small amounts of downward force. For visual cue here, you're wanting to apply no more than maybe 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters of total travel at a time. Remember, gentle pressure, less is more. It's a lot easier for you to correct very small over adjustments than it is for you to check going way past where you should have gone and now creating the same deflection in the opposite direction. Be sure to increase your force very slightly and incrementally if you find yourself needing to apply just a little bit more to correct the deflection. Torsion issues, however, are remarkably difficult to correct without a very specific tool. You can recognize torsion problems by looking at your wire, noticing that one leg will stand very slightly higher off the table than the other leg does. This basically means your wire is sort of twisted long ways. This is a problem because there's not really enough material on the legs for you to comfortably grip the wire with your hands or anything else that won't otherwise damage the surface of the wire to correct the torsion. Now, GeonWorks does have a stabilizer bending tool that's designed specifically to address torsion issues in wires. However, as of this filming, it's sold out. Also, depending on how infrequently you build keyboards, it might just make more sense for you to spend a couple of bucks on buying some spare wires in the event you have this kind of torsion problem. Once we've verified the wires are set, we're going to start lubing the legs with our 205 grade 0. We're looking for a thin, milky coating. Basically, when you're done, the legs should look like a frosted light diffusion version of the base color of the stabilizer wire. I find it easiest to get this effect when you heavily load your brush with 205 grade 0 and make gentle outward strokes on the wire leg to ensure that the metal is gripping a comfortable amount of lube. You're also going to want to lube where the stabilizer housing grips the wire. You want to be similarly heavy-handed here, since I have found in recent boards I've been tuning, this point can also be a source of rattling and ticking in tuned stabilizers. Lastly, we carefully insert the wire into the stem. Be sure to consider the desired wire orientation when clipping this in, otherwise you're going to have to unclip it and reseat the wire. These wuche stabs we worked with today hook in from underneath the housing. This is designed to prevent wire popping from caps gripping the stems too much and pulling them up enough that they just sort of pop the wire. This process will potentially shift the lube around, so even though we are going to be repeating this process until we have all of our fully assembled stabilizers, we are most likely not quite done tuning. Nonetheless, now is the time for installing your stabilizers and testing them. We're going to do this before the board is fully assembled because this just saves you a lot of time, heartache, and pain later on, because remember, in order to get to PCB mount stabilizers most of the time, you have to fully disassemble everything. And even if you don't have to, it's still a pain to do it on a fully assembled board. Installing your stabilizers should just be the reverse of removing them. Just make sure you have all your fasteners and washers in place to make sure that you're not shorting your components on anything adjacent to the fasteners. When testing stabilizer condition, be sure to use the plate for at least one test fit. Have switches installed in each corner of the plate to ensure proper switch alignment, and depending on the board design and other restrictions, you may also want to use the plate foam for some of your test fits. This was especially the case in the Icky 68 we used here, since it has not only a very flexy and thin PCB, but it also has a stupidly flexy plate, so having the plate foam in place kept everything a bit more sturdy and easier to work with. It's also best, I find, to test stabilizers with a linear switch. Reason being, tactiles have bumps in them, and the bump makes it sometimes difficult to determine where the problem lies with your stabilizers, whereas linear switches don't have that kind of interference, and it's just going to be smooth up and down travel. Just make sure whatever switch you're testing with has a similar stem length to the tactile switch you're going to be using. Otherwise, you may still notice some inconsistencies with lubing. You basically just use this switch with the stabilized cap plugged into the board and tap across the switch to the left and right. Listen for where your ticking is coming from and the undesirable noises, if any. If you're hearing some ticking on the left side, this is where you need to retune the left side of the stabilizer. The best way to do this is a syringe filled with lube. This is the other reason I use 205 grade 0 for most of my tuning. It's really easy to load into a syringe and really easy to direct exactly where I need it to go. And syringe kits are ultimately relatively inexpensive, and they are such a huge time saver for tuning stabilizers. To use this, you're going to want to lift the stem with a jeweler's claw or a stem claw, whichever you want to call it, and angle the tip of the syringe into the gap above the wire, injecting very small amounts of lube at a time. Remember, less is more. It's always easier to apply more than it is to remove too much. You're also going to want to check the gap in the front of the stem where the wire inserts into the stabilizer. You can also inject a small amount into here, since this can also be a source of ticking. Be careful with over-lubing at this part. This is really easy to do if you're not paying attention to how much lube you're inserting. And be sure to check your stabilizers after each round of lube application to see when the ticking has gone away, because you can over-lube and not only get your stem sticking to the PCB, but it's also possible you make the stabilized cap feel kind of sluggish on press and return. Now, very occasionally, the perfect storm arises. Not entirely unlike this Icky 68 that we got in to work on. Now, sometimes you will have warped keycaps or off-axis stem pulls in the bottom of the cap that are affecting the sound of the stabilizer. Try a known good set of keycaps, if you have them, on the board you're working on to see if maybe the caps are the source of the problem. If that's the case, and you're within a reasonable enough window to get this corrected, see if the manufacturer or the person that handled the group buy for it has extras that they can help you out with. And it's unfortunate that even in the year of our Lort 2022, $125 cap sets still have warped space bars. It's also possible there are manufacturing errors in the plastic part of the stabilizer that you may just really not be able to do anything about. I know I personally have several sets of buggered stabilizers that, outside of really extreme measures, I don't think I'm ever going to get to stop ticking or making what I can only describe as a crunchy sound. And no brand is immune to having faulty stabilizers. I've got Durox stabilizers, KBD fan stabilizers, owl stabs that are bunk. I even watched a live stream the other day where someone got a faulty set of TX stabilizers. Very occasionally, an overlubed switch can also cause problems with stabilizers ticking on you. Just open up the switch real quick and check to make sure that it's not overly or unevenly lubricated. Sometimes just spreading that around a little bit more and getting cleaner up and down movement on my switch has corrected certain unfavorable noises. Now, if you've hit the end of this guide and you're still having problems with your stabilizers, I'll have a link down in the video's description bringing you to the HOLEE mod, which is unfortunately something I had to do with our Icky 68 here today. You're basically lining the interior of your stabilizer stem with an adherable padded material, 3M medical tape, band-aid strips, whatever you have, to ensure that region of your stabilizer is not causing your rattling or ticking. In the end, this is a non-permanent mod, so if you end up not liking it, you can always remove it. However, I do feel like it's kind of unfair to associate HOLEE mod exclusively with individuals that don't know how to tune their stabilizers. I threw every trick in the book I had at these stabilizers, and I was not able to get them to stop ticking without the HOLEE mod, and even then, as you'll hear in the typing test, it's still not perfect. But the board is definitely a far sight better than it was when we first got it in. Now, as you can see, not everything is going to be perfect every single time, even when you're doing everything 100% correctly. But if you follow all the tips and tricks in this guide, then you too should have some awesome sounding keyboard stabilizers. Now, if you're still a little bit lost on any aspect of tuning your stabilizers, make sure you comment down below. I can't promise I'll get to everyone, but I will do my best to answer any and all of your questions as I can. And if you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. You're the real goats. Toss us a thumbs up on the way out if you liked what you saw. Make sure you get subscribed and notified so you don't miss any of our content when it goes live. And if you'd like to contribute to helping us make more and higher quality content, make sure you stop by our Ko-fi page down below. And as always, we'll catch you in the next one.